Hi, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're exploring a topic that resonates deeply for a lot of us: avoidance and people-pleasing. Have you ever found yourself saying yes to something when you really wanted to say no? Or maybe you dodged a difficult conversation, but then later it just felt heavy and stressful. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. In this video, we're going to explore why we sometimes avoid situations that feel uncomfortable and why we often bend over backwards to keep other people happy, even at our own expense. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how these behaviors are connected and how they can trap us in a cycle that's tough to break. And because I work with attachment, we're going to explore how people-pleasing and avoidance ties in with the different attachment styles. And don't worry, I'm also going to cover some practical steps you can take to start turning things around. So if you're ready to break free from the holds that avoidance and people-pleasing have on your life, keep watching. By the way, I'm Kayli.larkin. I help individuals who are frustrated and ready to give up on love to attract romantic relationships with more ease, trust, and deep connection. Consider the fact that a lot of our people-pleasing comes from how we function as a society. This instinct has been passed down to us because our ancestors needed to fit in with the tribe to stay safe and secure. And if no one cared what other people thought, then society wouldn't function well. But that being said, if you're a chronic people pleaser, you know the challenges that can bring. Constantly putting other people first can leave you feeling drained and unfulfilled, and it's natural to want to be liked, but it's important to find a balance that doesn't compromise your well-being. And just to make sure we're on the same page, when I say avoidance, I'm talking about when we steer clear of things that make us uncomfortable. Now that might be an awkward conversation or a challenging task, or sometimes even just our own feelings. It's kind of like hitting the snooze button on something that we don't want to deal with, hoping it'll just go away. But as many of us know, it usually doesn't, and instead it can create even bigger problems down the road. On the other hand, people-pleasing, it's all about putting other people's needs ahead of our own, often to the point where we lose sight of what we actually want or need. It might start with something as simple as agreeing to a favor that we don't have time for, or avoiding conflict by going along with someone else's plans. But over time, it can lead to feeling overwhelmed, resentful, and even disconnected from our own true selves. You might guess that people-pleasing, that can lead to avoidance. And after all, if you don't want to disappoint other people or you don't want to get in a conflict, then avoiding them, that can seem like a comfortable strategy. Also, avoidance can lead to people-pleasing. So if you're avoiding conflict, you might start trying to make other people happy, or you're like bending over backwards to help. So you might wonder, okay, which comes first, avoidance or people-pleasing? It's kind of like a chicken and egg scenario. To really understand avoidance and people-pleasing, it's helpful to look at attachment styles. And so these are behaviors that start early on in childhood based on our interactions with our caregivers. And this attachment style, it affects how we handle stress, it affects how we handle conflict, and even how we relate to other people as we're adults, because that attachment style, remember, it just comes along with us as we grow and develop and get older. So most people have one primary style. They're often a blend of all four attachment styles. And also remember that someone's attachment stance, it could be different with different people. Like they might be secure with their partner, and then they might be avoidant with a neighbor who they don't get along with or something like that. So the first style is called secure attachment. And folks with a secure attachment style, they're comfortable with time together and they're comfortable with time apart. So they tend to have a nice, healthy, balanced relationship, and they're able to talk through conflict in the moment or give someone space to talk when they're ready. The next style is called anxious attachment. People with an anxious attachment style, they worry more about their relationships. They're really focused on relational stability. They might be people-pleasing to avoid rejection or abandonment, or that fear of abandonment. And they tend to like talking through conflict when they're upset. So they're that person who wants to figure it out together. They don't like that lingering feeling of uncertainty. Whereas an avoidant attachment, those folks, they really value independence. They might feel uncomfortable with too much closeness. They often avoid emotional intimacy, and they might use people-pleasing as a way to keep interactions on a more superficial level, but also a more pleasant one, so thereby avoiding that deeper emotional risk. In conflict, they'd often rather calm down and take some space rather than talk through it immediately. Finally, there's disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment. And this style, it combines both elements of both anxious and avoidant attachment. So folks with the disorganized attachment style, they might desire close relationships, but they also fear being hurt. So they might engage in that avoidance in order to protect themselves from potential rejection. And that people-pleasing, it can serve to kind of smooth relationships and avoid conflict. Conflict to them can feel really overwhelming, so they might try to avoid it, then be overly accommodating or defensive in order to protect themselves. Understanding the 4 styles, it sheds light on why you might lean towards avoidance or people-pleasing. So, for example, if you have an avoidant attachment style, you might avoid that deep emotional connection to protect yourself from vulnerability. Completely makes sense. On the other hand, if you have an anxious attachment style, you might overcommit or people please to gain that reassurance and to prevent potential abandonment. Also, completely makes sense. Again, these are thoughtful strategies, smart adaptations that developed early in childhood. Now, recognizing these patterns in yourself, it's a powerful step towards changing them, because although they were smart when someone was a kid, it doesn't always work when we're adults. So with that said, let's explore how people-pleasing and avoidance impacts your relationships and what you can do to start breaking the cycle. First of all, people-pleasing leads to putting on a mask to meet other people's needs and expectations. So this unfortunately can lead to a sort of lack of authenticity. If you're trying really hard to please other people, you might not be sharing your true thoughts and feelings. So if you really value authenticity and you're a people pleaser, those two things can sometimes be in conflict. So it also means that we're avoiding difficult conversations or emotions, which is how we build trust and understanding. Without addressing issues, unresolved tensions, they can build and they can create distance, maybe even more tension. I really like how James Clear describes this distinction between a puddle and a leak. And I don't know if you've heard this, but it's kind of like, okay, is the conversation like a puddle where it's just gonna, if you have a conversation, it's gonna stir up a bunch of unnecessary muck, it's gonna make things worse? Or is it like a leak where avoiding the conversation will cause things to get worse over time? The superficiality, though, is just part of the problem, because people-pleasing and avoidance, they also cause relational imbalance. Because if you're people-pleasing, you're prioritizing other people's needs and you're doing more of the giving, they're doing more of the taking. And this comes up a lot in narcissistic relationships, where one person's trying to take care of the other person, or even on a social level with this dynamic. It leads to exhaustion and resentment, because in that case, you might feel undervalued. And finally, these behaviors lead to more stress. So even though we might be thinking, gosh, I'll just avoid this difficult conversation, or I'll make everyone happy, that should lower stress, it actually does the opposite in some sense. Because when you prioritize pleasing other people, you live in constant fear of disappointing them, and that causes anxiety. So you might have less stress temporarily, but more stress in the long term. By the way, there are instances where avoidance and having firm boundaries are very helpful, such as with narcissistic dynamics that just aren't serving you. And in that case, avoidance is protective, and it minimizes the harm that goes along with their gaslighting, minimizing, and manipulation. It's not about running away from your emotions in that case, it's about focusing on your own self-care. But in general, putting others' needs ahead of yours can lower your self-worth, because it gives you the message that your needs aren't important. So let's talk about how to break the cycle of people-pleasing and avoidance. The first step is awareness, identifying your triggers that cause you to avoid conflict or people. Are there certain people who trigger this for you? Reflect on your motivation for avoiding them. Do you fear confrontation or rejection? Secondly, learn how to set healthy boundaries. I have a whole course on boundaries for anxious attachment style. You can practice saying no when the stakes are low to build confidence, and then communicate your boundaries as clearly as possible. You can be compassionate and firm. It doesn't need to be like a wall, unless that's necessary. Sometimes it is. Third, lean into the growth edge, but gradually. So start with very small, challenging conversations to build up your resilience. Understand that not every situation is going to be perfect, and that's fine. So say, for example, you're out with friends and talking about what restaurant to go to for dinner, and they suggest one that you don't really like. So instead of just going along to avoid conflict, you could suggest another restaurant, give reasons why that might be a good choice. Or you could ask a coworker to help you out with a task when you're feeling overwhelmed. So start with small things. And fourth, focus on activities that build your self-esteem. So spend time with supportive people who respect your boundaries. I have a whole video on attachment and self-esteem. Remind yourself that your needs are just as important as everyone else's. And remember to surround yourself with positive, supportive people, whether that's a coach or a network of supportive, loving friends. Just building that network is going to be helpful. If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe to be notified of new videos on attachment style and relationships. You might also be interested in checking out my range of courses and videos at kayli.larkin.com. There's a secure attachment rewire course, a mini course on feeling safe in love, a course on boundaries, and a whole bunch of guided meditations and a blog with tons of free resources. And you can also join my mailing list to stay connected and get the latest tips and discounts on courses as they come out. Please share this video with anyone who you think might like it. You never know who you're going to help. Thank you so much for watching. This is Kayli Larkin, wishing you a beautiful relational journey.